to go, ready to read the news. A little low energy today. Might just skim it instead. I don't know. We'll see how I feel. Anyway, first one. Trump backtracks and lists tariffs on most Mexican and Canadian goods for a month. White House claims the tariffs are meant to punish Mexican and Canadian governments for allowing fentanyl to be smuggled in the U.S., which he stated as much. We know this. Anybody pretending it's anything different is a fucking retard. So, if they're stepping up their enforcement and all that, it would make sense that the tariffs get lifted or moved back a little bit. But President Trump on Thursday said he was granting a month-long reprieve on unilaterally ordering tax increases on some goods imported from Mexico and Canada that expire on April 2nd, when he's set to order reciprocal tariffs on imports from a broad range of countries. And this is kind of just what we've been talking about the entire time, is this whole reciprocal tariffs thing, punitive tariffs, all that good stuff. So as long as Mexico and Canada are doing their part in enforcing their borders and making sure that the smuggling does not continue, we don't need these other tariffs on here. After a telephone call with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum, which that's a very Spanish name, earlier in the day, Trump said he was granting an exemption on any goods imported to the U.S. that are compliant with the U.S.-Mexico-Canada trade agreement that he negotiated during his first term, like a replacement for NAFTA. And that, again, that makes sense. The whole idea is to give American businesses and American workers an opportunity to benefit from trade with our neighbors rather than suffering at the hands of them for unfair trade policies and whatnot. So, after speaking with President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico, I have agreed that Mexico will not be required to pay any tariffs on anything that falls under the USMCA agreement. This agreement is until April 2nd, he said in a statement posted to his Truth Social platform. And, yeah, I mean, the dude is making deals and honoring deals and open to negotiations, and that's why everything's changing so much. And I think that we are so we're so unfamiliar with the concept of diplomacy and negotiation that it looks like inconsistency, or it looks like backtracking, or whatever you want to call it, when in reality it's just how negotiations work. He added that the temporary reprieve was an accommodation made out of respect for Sheinbaum, who he credited for working hard with him to combat illegal immigration and fentanyl trafficking across the U.S.-Mexico border. And given that that's the point of the punitive tariffs anyway, the fact that Mexico is making an effort and showing good faith on that part, credit where credit's due. And I think that we need to be a little more patient in how we look at these, especially when it's criticize him for instituting the tariffs and then it's criticize him for repealing them. And it's like, well, the whole reason they're there is to combat illegal immigration and fentanyl, at least in the sense of the punitive ones. And so when he's repealing them, when Mexico's doing their part, criticizing him at that point makes no sense. Our relationship has been a very good one, and we're working hard together on the border, both in terms of stopping illegal aliens from entering the United States, down 97% or something, and likewise stopping the fentanyl. Again, this is the point. Thank you to President Sheinbaum for your hard work and cooperation, he said. Speaking in the Oval Office a few hours later, Trump called Sheinbaum a wonderful woman and said he'd help them out by signing orders to pause the tariffs. He claimed that both countries and others were ripping off the United States and downplayed effects tariffs would have on North American consumers. They are. When we're paying 2, 3, 4 times as much to sell our goods in their markets as they are to sell theirs in ours, they're ripping us off. There's nothing wrong with wanting fairness across the trade deals. There's nothing wrong with wanting equal tariffs. If a country is charging 5% for us to access their market, we should charge them 5% to access ours. It's now these countries and companies, foreign companies that have been ripping us off, and no president did anything about it until I came along, and I did a lot about it, he said. And he kind of has. Trump has claimed that countries were being harmed by the tariffs were globalist in nature and accused them of mistreating the United States. Where's the lie? A lot of them are globalist countries and companies that won't be doing so as well because we're taking back things that have been taken from us for many years ago, or taken from us many years ago. We've been treated very unfairly as a country, he said. And yes, he's absolutely right. Whether it's in the form of our contribution to NATO and our NATO allies not pulling their weight in terms of military defense spending, whether it's in terms of trade with with countries like Canada, where there's a 200 like 100 and something percent tariff on goods going in there, but not, we even think about putting a tariff on goods coming from there, and it's like the apocalypse for them. Turnabout's fair play. Like, we're under no obligation to engage in trade with these countries at all, and the fact that we are willing to be diplomatic about it instead of just saying, okay, you don't want tariffs, period, then bye-bye market. Like, we could do that instead if you'd like. The American president has spent months stoking a feud with his country's northern neighbor and has claimed that there's an epidemic of fentanyl trafficking across the U.S.-Canada border, the largest unguarded border in the world. It would be stupid to think there wasn't. It might not be as big as he's claiming it to be, which I'm sure we'll go on to read, but it does come through. And if you clamp down on the southern border, then naturally you would expect the movement to shift from the northern border. In reality, the vast majority is of fentanyl entering the U.S. on land comes from Mexico through legal ports of entry smuggled by Americans. Okay? And how does... if we clamp down on the southern border and make that not as viable, not as simple, with both sides, Mexico's cooperating in that, naturally, these smugglers would say, oh, this is no longer viable, change tactics. But this has not stopped Trump from using the alleged fentanyl trafficking as a pretext to unilaterally impose tariffs, impose import taxes on goods from Canada, and claiming that the tariffs, which are paid by Americans, not entirely true, could be avoided were Canadians to elect to have their country annexed by the United States. I mean, they could be. If Canada was a territory of the United States, they would not be a separate country and we wouldn't pay import tariffs on it. That's how tariffs work. You don't tariff goods coming from Louisiana to California. Peter Navarro, the longtime Trump confidant who serves as the president's top trade advisor while the Senate considers this his nominee to serve as United States Trade Representative, he told reporters on Thursday that the tariffs on Canadian goods were all about fentanyl. I think that's a gross oversimplification, but sure. Navarro claimed that a wide panoply of fake prescription drugs being imported from Canada contain illicit fentanyl that is contributing to deaths from the drug being undercounted. And I think that if you want to address the fentanyl problem, what you do is you legalize all drugs in America and you have them sold with proper labeling and proper oversight, and just like prescription drugs are, you could go into... create a system in which you could go into a fucking 7-Eleven or whatever, and you want to buy, I don't know, heroin, whatever, buy it at the counter. It's labeled, it's regulated, it's not got any adulterants in it, and you get rid of the... If you get rid of the illicit aspect of it by having it on a black market, you can regulate it more properly and at least mitigate the harm that comes of it. Same with Xanax, Ambien, Codone, Valium, whatever. Somebody takes a Xanax or Ambien or an oxycodone or Valium, and it's spiked with fentanyl, and they wind up on the floor, foaming at the mouth and dead. Yes, because you have a black market where there is no accountability on the manufacturer's side, as well as no recourse for the consumer to go after the seller if there's any adulterants in it, any false representation of what's in it. So, and typically is not reported as a fentanyl death. It is often reported as a suicide or some other things. But the scope of the fake restriction prescription drugs is staggering, he said. The point is that people in America really need to know when they try to get a bargain on the internet because their budgets are squeezed by the Biden inflation, they can wind up dead simply if they're seeking out an antidepressant, he added. Again, you legalize everything across the board. You cut out the requirement to have some dude in a lab coat say you need it, and you just go to the store. You don't get rid of the prescription aspect of it. You can still be recommended it by a doctor, but it just makes it to where you no longer have to continue to pay to keep that script active. Would go a long way in helping it, because people in chronic pain management or whatever that can't work or don't have enough money to get their doctor's visits, they know what they need, and having them check in periodically with a doctor costs them money that they may not otherwise have. And you have situations where they can't afford their prescriptions, or they are no longer valid because they can't get a checkup, and then they turn to street drugs which are adulterated, and that's a problem. Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick also told reporters that the goal of the tariffs is to decrease fentanyl trafficking, and said Canada and Mexico have done a good job offering us more work to prove to us they're going to cut the fentanyl. But he dismissed criticism of Trump's policies based on negative effects the tariffs were having on the stock market, telling reporters the fact that the stock market goes up and down 0.5% on a given day is not the driving force of our outcomes. And that's true. It's going to fluctuate periodically anyway for other reasons. Trudeau, the Canadian Prime Minister and love child of Fidel Castro, has called the unilateral tax increases imposed on Americans by his American counterpart. It's not on Americans, first off. A very dumb thing to do. Well, if it's just increasing it on us, what does it fucking matter to you, buddy? Like, that's an interesting... Why do you care that Americans are going to pay more taxes if it only applies to us? And he said the trade war started by Trump could continue for some time. The prospect of a long trade war fought by the U.S. against two of its largest trading partners has depressed American stock markets to a point that all gains made since Trump was sworn in for a second term have been erased. Trump's reliance on tariffs has drawn at least some criticism from a number of his Republican allies, particularly those in Congress who represent states that rely on cross-border trade. I don't care. Like, that's the one thing. Like, we need... Where is this outrage when it comes to new taxes on the middle class, lower class? Where is this outrage when it comes to just income tax as a general concept, right? If there were consistency, I would at least take the arguments as good faith and reasonable, but it's like Trudeau complaining about if the tax is only going to be borne by, or, the brunt of the tax is only going to be borne by the American people, what the fuck does Canada care? Unless it threatens them, they have no reason to care, so stay the fuck out of our politics, buddy. Susan Collins, the longtime GOP senator from Maine, said on Thursday, it's unclear whether Trump is aware of how the unilateral sales tax increases he's imposing will negatively impact her constituents. Again, I feel like I'm repeating myself here because it's the same shit. It's a weak argument, and it's not reflective of reality. I don't know that he fully appreciates how integrated the economies are in border states with Canada. People cross every single day. That's irrelevant. Trump has spent years touting the supposed benefits of tariffs, which he routinely describes as if they are fees paid by foreign governments as a sort of entry fee for the privilege of accessing American markets. And if you can't understand how that is an accurate statement, then you shouldn't really even be criticizing them at all, because you don't understand how tariffs function. The person selling the good can pass 100% of the tariff onto the American people. Yes, that is true. The American people are under no requirement to pay it, because they can find an alternative or purchase a different good, or just not purchase the good, period. But again, if expecting leftists to understand how economics even functions is like expecting some lower creature to be able to read poetry or recite Shakespeare. But tariffs aren't paid by foreign governments. They're taxes that charged on to American importers and passed on to American consumers in the form of higher prices for imported goods. In some cases, the importer could eat the entire cost of it in order to keep the price low enough if they think that they're going to lose the market if they don't. They could shift production to America in order to avoid it altogether and produce the good here. They could split the difference and slightly increase the price while slightly eating some of the cost. There are options that are available to them that are being ignored for the sake of political posturing and politicizing this in a disingenuous manner, and it's complete and total bullshit. Yet Trump has persisted in claiming that tariffs are paid by foreign governments. I don't think he's ever said it's foreign governments. I think that's a misrepresentation. At a press conference last week alongside British Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, he claimed that the fact that tariffs are paid by importers is actually a myth that has been put out there by foreign countries that really don't like paying tariffs. What that's worth. More money news. Second federal judge extends block preventing the Trump administration from phasing funding. This is ridiculous. I was going to say that. The second federal judge on Thursday extended a block barring the Trump administration from freezing grants and loans potentially totaling trillions of dollars. One tiny-ass place, Rhode Island, can freeze funding across the entire country for the most nebulous and just fragile of reasons. It's ridiculous. U.S. District Court Judge John McConnell in Rhode Island granted the preliminary injunction in the lawsuit filed by nearly 24 Democratic states after the Trump administration planned for a sweeping pause on federal spending. It wasn't even a cancellation, it was a pause. It was to investigate it, to make sure that it was valid, and then to reassess. And the fact that they need their money, forcing the Trump administration to pay it out while the lawsuit is ongoing. If the lawsuit is found in Trump administration's favor and these states were wrong to bring the lawsuit entirely, what then? You force them to pay it out and you have no recourse to gather the fucking money back up. It's stirred up a wave of confusion and anxiety across the United States. In his ruling, McConnell said that the executive branch was trying to put itself above Congress and by doing so undermines the distinct constitutional roles of each branch of government. This is discretionary spending, sir. This is not... This is not funding that was... Oh my god. The executive has not pointed to any constitutional or statutory authority that would allow them to impose this type of categorical freeze, McConnell wrote. The court is not limiting the executive's discretion or micromanaging the administration of federal funds, rather consistent with the Constitution, statutes, and case law. The courts are simply holding that the executive's discretion to impose its own policy preferences on appropriated funds can be exercised only if it's authorized by the congressionally approved appropriation statutes. It's a lot of words to say that they think that we'll let it play out, see what happens. States say a litany of programs are still waiting for federal funds or some clarity on whether the money is going to be delivered. McConnell also states the states have demonstrated standing in the case. They've introduced dozens of uncontested declarations illustrating the effects of the indiscriminate and unpredictable freezing of federal funds, which implicate nearly all aspects of states' governmental operations or inhibit their ability to administer vital services to their residents. It's financial damages. That's it. That's not damages. You can make that whole very simply by paying out after the case. However, if the government wins this lawsuit, it's going to be a lot harder for those those places to repay all of that money that they wrongfully stole. The declarations reflect at least one particularized, concrete, and imminent harm that flows from federal funding pause, a significant indefinite loss of obligated federal funding. Again, you can make that whole very simply. Attempted to subvert the rule of law in favor of illegal executive power. We don't have kings, blah, blah, blah. Americans pay taxes to the federal government, knowing that Congress will allocate their dollars towards agencies and programs that will support them in their daily lives. He continued, President's federal funding freeze would be laughable if it wasn't so utterly destructive. Again, they're saying this without making any... There's two types of funding. There's apportioned and discretionary. There's committed and, whatever. Flies in the face of everything we know to be true. These people are just... Among the funding impacted is billions of dollars that would fund rooftop solar powers in low-income neighborhoods, subsidies low, moderate-income households, purchase and installation of electric heat pump water heaters, and grants to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, among other harmful pollutants. Okay, all of those are things that can wait. None of these are life and death, and all of these can wait until the lawsuit is settled. The funding freeze is not affecting anything here. It's simply saying, let's investigate it, make sure that it's not being wasted, and get the money to the people that it belongs to, not to private interest of NGOs and whatnot that are embezzling it. The illegal funding freeze jeopardized law enforcement funding, essential healthcare, and childcare services, and other critical programs that millions of Americans rely on, said Letitia James in a... Well, consider the source. The White House previously said that the temporary funding halt would ensure that the payments complied with Trump's agenda, which includes increasing fossil fuels production. That's not even... God, AP, can you... properly label opinion? Republican administration has since rescinded a memo outlining the funding freeze. Still, many state government, universities, and nonprofits have argued federal agencies continue to block funding for a large range of programs. How about this? Malicious compliance. Give them $1 a fucking month of their funding until the cases are over. That would be... Some good news. Newsom calls trans athletes in sports unfair in a podcast with Charlie Kirk. Newsom broke with many Democrats on the issue of trans people in sports. And this is showing that a potential frontrunner in the 2028 election on the Democrat side is at least willing to engage with the other side and discuss things in a way that is reasonable and intelligent rather than doubling down on dogma. To which I applaud. He'd still have a long ways to go, and right now it is only talk. I'd have to see action put to his words, but he's moving in the correct direction, and I applaud that. Governor Newsom, on his podcast, this is Gavin Newsom, said that transgender athletes competing in girls' and women's sports was deeply unfair. That takes, fucking props to you, sir. I will fully admit that I did not have that on my bingo card for this year. Newsom has been a strong advocate for LGBTQ plus rights over the years, but he's vetoed several bills to bolster protections for transgender children and adults. And now he's breaking with many Democrats on the issue of trans people in sports. President Trump made attacks on trans people in sports central to the closing weeks of his campaign. He's used executive actions to remove protections from transgender Americans in the military, sports, and on government documents. In the conversation with right-wing influencer Charlie Kirk, Kirk asked Newsom to speak on the issue, specifically about transgender high school track athlete in California. And Newsom said that, I think it's an issue of fairness, and I completely agree with you on that, which is a reasonable statement to make. It's not invalidating these people as wrong or anything like that. It's simply stating that there are inherent biological physiological differences from bone structure, muscle mass, and whatnot, fast twitch muscle, that give one gender an edge over the other in certain sports, and it is reasonable to keep them separate, lest we wind up with volleyballers paralyzed on half of their body, or other such, Leah Thompson thing and all that. But 66% of U.S. adults favor or strongly favor laws that require trans athletes to participate on teams that match their sex assigned at birth, according to a study. 56% express support for protecting trans people from discrimination. These are not mutually exclusive either. Just so you know, it is saying that you don't have to penalize these people for existing while also protecting women's sports. Sports are an entirely ancillary, optional activity you can engage in. And to do so, you have to meet certain requirements laid out by the organization of them. And if they decide that something based on gender lines is appropriate, that's for them to decide. Make your own authority on it, or make your own organization to compete. In the friendly interview with Kirk, Newsom also distanced himself from the phrase Latin X, saying no one in his office has ever used the term, because it's fucking stupid. It's trying to... It's assuming that the gendered language of Spanish is somehow speaking to the biological equivalent of it, and that's fucking retarded. They also discussed the impact influencers like Kirk have on Newsom's 13-year-old sons, book bans, wokeism, pronouns. Newsom also said there were issues with leadership of Black Lives Matter organization, and said pushes to defund the police were lunacy. I need to see action, but I like the words you're saying, sir. Human Rights Campaign, an LGBTQ plus advocacy organization, says the attack on trans athletes has been a non-issue, with athletic governing bodies balancing fairness and inclusion without difficulty. I need... have they? Really? Really? I mean, really? Have they? Long-standing anti-equality activists manufactured a misinformed conversation about elite adult athletes to justify passing extreme discriminatory legislation targeting transgender youth in schools. The organization wrote in a fact sheet about trans sports bans. Why is it that anytime you see a male to female trans athlete, they always seem to be scoring in the upper echelons of the sport? Where are the female to male ones that are transitioning and competing and exceeding? If there were no benefit conveyed by it, you wouldn't have middle-of-the-road male athletes undergoing transition, joining female leagues, and absolutely dominating. You would see them middling, by and large, as a law of averages. But the fact is that that just simply doesn't happen. And that's not saying that there's anything inherently wrong with what they're doing. I am very pro-individual liberty. Do whatever the fuck you want. Transition however the fuck you want. I don't care. But again, when it starts to impact the lives of other people, that's where I draw the line. Next up, Trump administration is signaling it may bring criminal referrals against employees of the U.S. Agency for International Development or grantee recipients over allegations of misuse of foreign assistance, which would mark an extraordinary next step in the administration's push to gut the agency. It's wonderful. Fraud is being punished, and I love it. Peter Morocco, who is serving as the acting deputy administrator for USAID, told lawmakers in a closed-door briefing Wednesday that he and his staff are looking at making criminal referrals to the DOJ, according to two people familiar with the conversations. Bless you, Kat. Bless you. It's unclear if Morocco will follow through with the threat, said one person who was in the room during the briefing, but they saw it as a significant signal coming in a meeting with members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. January memo said that USAID Office of Inspector General laid out the resistance from some aid grantees over sharing information the officials say is needed for oversight and accountability. Memo highlighted $8 billion that was primarily distributed to United Nations agencies and multilateral development banks, which they criticize as being shielded from scrutiny. Now, why would you move it into bank accounts and organizations that don't have any kind of transparency or oversight unless you're trying to hide it or mask where the money was flowing? However, the advisory notice on February 10th warned that the Trump administration's mass layoffs of USAID staff and contractors and a freeze on foreign aid hindered oversight and the safeguarding of $8.2 billion in obligated humanitarian assistance. Obligated is an interesting word there. We are not obligated to provide shit to anybody for any fucking reason other than our own people. So, fucking prove your case. Both reports were authored by Paul K. Martin, a veteran of Trump's first term who was appointed by Biden on January 2nd and dismissed on February 11th. State Department, when reached for comment, said it generally does not comment on communications and briefings with Congress, Secretary of State Marco Rubio is the official head of USAID, but Morocco has been a leading figure in the efforts to gut the agency. Criminal referrals would further escalate tensions between Trump administration and Elon Musk's DOGE team on one side and government employees, foreign aid recipients, and Democrats on the other. Why is it that there's so many Democrats on that side? Isn't that a bit of a slight concern that the majority of the funding is going in one direction politically? That definitely raises alarm bells that the predominant party that is receiving any of this money happens to be from one political party, isn't it? Some Republicans have privately advocated for certain programs and spending priorities behind the scenes. Democrats slammed the Wednesday meeting with Morocco, saying little information was learned about the Trump administration's decision to carry out mass layoffs related to USAID and terminate thousands of funding grants amounting to about $60 billion. And this is $60 billion for trans comics in Peru and making transgender mice and woke DEI programs the world over. This is nonsense money being spent on nonsense things with no accountability, no requirement to prove need, nothing. It's fluff. It's funding underwater basket weaving programs the world over, and it's frankly fucking retarded. We ask specifically what American companies who have been contracted with the State Department, contracted with USAID, have been terminated and why. He refused to answer the question. While he contradicted himself, saying that they have detailed documentation on all programs and all vendors, and yet somehow he's not able to provide that information. Well, if it's ongoing investigation, we don't want to give any kind of heads up to the people that might be being investigated so that they can begin destroying evidence like the FBI has with the Epstein fucking information, you dolts. Democrats complained the briefing occurred behind closed doors and not publicly. Oh, well, that seemed to be fine for the fucking select hearing on January 6th, didn't it? Lasted only 1 hour and permitted each lawmaker 30 seconds to ask question with few, if any, follow-ups allowed. Morocco was given 2 minutes to answer each question. He couldn't address why errors were made. He didn't give us any specifics on how they were conducting this review. He's not under any obligation to. This is, again, if you start giving out specifics on an active investigation, the criminal element may be notified and begin destroying evidence that could otherwise result in prosecution. Could give us answers on what specific programs are turned off or turned on, and wouldn't even commit to providing us a written accounting of what the money is going to and what is being turned on or turned off. So I think it's clear that this is anything but an actual methodical review. Yeah, that's your opinion, man. Not all Republicans were comfortable with Morocco's briefing. Don't care. The waivers meant to be exempt life-saving foreign assistance were not being fully implemented. Again, what obligation is the United States under to protect people from foreign countries when we're ignoring our own? This is a repeating argument. It just keeps coming up over and over and over and over again that for whatever reason we have some obligation to the rest of the world to bankroll all these programs while our own people starve or go homeless. And when we try to reallocate that money or investigate it, it's just cries of wrongdoing. I'm sorry, but shipping out our wealth to benefit the world when our own people are suffering is complete and total fucking bullshit. The government does not exist to make the world a better place. It exists to make our country a better place, to better our people. It is a collective effort for we the people, not we the whole fucking world. Don't care. Republicans have rallied around grants to programs they oppose, such as LGBTQ and inclusion and visibility programs or education grants for refugees. Again, you want these fucking programs, donate yourself. Don't do it with the taxpayer money. If you're gonna, and doubly so if you're gonna do it in other countries. It is not our obligation at all to provide gender studies programs in fucking Pakistan or wherever the fuck. This is the most... it's the same justification over and over and over again, and it's just a fucking thinly veiled, well, you're mean, or, well, they're suffering. I'm sorry they are suffering. That sucks for them, but they have a government. They have taxes. They have infrastructure that can protect them. Go complain to their government about it. I don't give two fucks. This is our country. We need to not be giving all of our money to the rest of the world. It would be nice to do if everything was in order here in our own house, but it's not. And so until it is, I don't think we should be spending money outside of our borders. I don't know why that's such a foreign concept to people. Mr. Morocco is very clear in exposing the waste that goes on out there, pointing out the way that many of these programs at state and USAID are designed to not be held accountable, and making sure, again, that the priority is to put dollars into programs that save life, food, medication, blah, 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 and not all the other BS that's going on, like radical liberal things. Morocco met with lawmakers shortly after the Supreme Court rejected the Trump administration's request to keep billions of dollars in foreign aid frozen, sending the case back to the lower courts and potentially allowing the administration to continue to dispute the order. The big question was, why would they abide by the Supreme Court's ruling? I hope they don't, or I hope they do so maliciously by giving them $1 at a time. It's so just... It's so deaf to the reasoning of the opposition in this case. I hear the arguments that they're making, and all of their arguments are that the United States is obligated to pay the bills of the rest of the world. We're not. Their arguments are the United States is obligated to uplift and champion underprivileged, underrepresented, or downtrodden people the world over. We're not. The United States government is obligated to protect the American people. It is obligated to enforce our borders. It is obligated to ensure that the lives of American citizens within our borders and the globe over are safe and secure and have the ability to prosper. It would be nice if we could do things with foreign aid to make the world a nicer place, but until we are taking care of all of our own, and until we have created a circumstance in which nobody that the government has an obligation to here at home is taken care of, I don't particularly give two fucks what the rest of the world is doing. That's not the scope of what the government is there to do. And the last one of today, pretty quick one. Elon Musk's Starlink business could soon tap into $42 billion federal program. This is the Biden one to broadband connect the rural America, which they spent a bunch of money on and got, nobody going anywhere. Commerce Department has changed its rules in the way that could open the door for Starlink, Elon Musk's satellite internet service, to become part of a federal $42 billion grant program to bring high-speed internet service to rural and poor areas of the United States. The rules of the program previously gave preference to fiber optic service that essentially shut out services like Starlink, which beams high-speed internet access from its satellites in low Earth orbit to terminals on the ground. Commerce Department, which oversees the program, announced Wednesday that it is now open to all forms of internet connectivity. And it should have been from the inception. It makes no sense that they would only want fiber infrastructure as terrestrial-based when you have something like Starlink, especially for rural and otherwise remote locations that might not be able to feasibly have the build-outs of fiber networks be fiscally reasonable, even. The department is ripping out the Biden administration's pointless requirements. It said in a statement, it's revamping how the BEAD program to take a tech-neutral approach that is rigorously driven by outcomes so states can provide internet access for the lowest cost. And that makes sense. If you have an option that can accomplish the goal of the program, who cares what the methodology by which they do that is, if it satisfies the end conditions? The results are what matters, not the fucking intentions behind it. It doesn't matter the process as long as you get the good results. It's not an ends justify the means, so to speak, but it's there's no sense in making arbitrary requirements that it be fiber over DSL, over coax, over satellite. If one accomplishes what is done, who cares what the infrastructure that supports it is? It is good to have multiple options available and in use, because if one goes down, the other ones don't. Lutnick did not specifically mention plans to grant funds under the program to Starlink or any other satellite service, but the tech-neutral reference points in that direction. Oh, so in other words, you're trying to draw connections between Elon Musk's Starlink and his position at DOGE so you can further discredit him as somebody who's biased in where he's directing his attention. Is that it? Because I seem to recall where he put the grants or the money that was going to the armored Cybertrucks that the government wanted to buy. I'm pretty sure he suggested that for cuts. So, BEAD, created by Congress in 2021, has yet to connect any homes to the internet. Spent $20 billion on terrestrial infrastructure, and you have not connected a single home. Whatever the argument for using Starlink satellite service instead of fiber optics, the move would seem contrary to efforts by the Trump administration, plus those at the Department of Government Efficiency, to cut government spending and halt federal grant programs already approved by Congress. Well, so again, you're speculating. This has not actually been given to them yet, so not a problem yet. It's an if, and even so, it's like you're getting mad about things that haven't even happened yet for the simple fact that they could happen, rather than, and there's no guarantee that anybody who actually thinks about things can see that it's a thinly veiled attempt to draw connections between it. Raises new questions about conflicts of interest. Oh wow, just like I had just said, Starlink has had trouble getting contracts from various government programs meant to bring high-speed internet service to rural areas. In 2023, Federal Communications Commission rejected an $885 million contract that Starlink had won in preliminary business under similar but separate program, the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, saying that it did not meet the fiber optic preference. Who cares? It's fucking discriminatory. Like, oh, how dare you have preference for one mode of connectivity over the other? Like, Musk and Trump cut spending elsewhere. Have said that money-losing government services such as U.S. Postal Service and Amtrak should be privatized or transformed into for-profit businesses. These moves would save taxpayers money and improve the services. Post office, I kind of agree with. They're really on my shit list as of late. Even as Musk makes this argument, the same government agencies that are facing staffing or budget cuts are also considering massive new contracts for Musk's business, considering not entering into. And, you know, if there were such a problem with Starlink, why is Ukraine so dependent on them? Why did they make such a difference in the wake of Hurricane Helene? They're testing Starlink terminals to determine whether Starlink can be used to upgrade communication system for air traffic control systems. Verizon, which has $2 billion 15-year contract to upgrade the system's communications infrastructure, was putting airline passengers at risk because of problems with the current system. And Starlink could do a better job. And that's an argument to be made. And it's for whoever is doling out the money to determine. Is there a potential conflict of interest there? Yes. Is it a guarantee? No. Despite Musk's initial claim about Verizon running the current system, which he later retracted, the FAA's current communications infrastructure is still relying on decades-old copper wire system, overseen by L3 Harris, and is not yet using Verizon equipment. They're testing multiple communication technologies and have not decided which system to use, though they've already awarded Verizon the $2 billion contract. So that sounds like a lot of words to say we're not fully into the Verizon system that we bought for $2 billion, but let's see, Lunar X, what is this? Crisscross shape on the moon, that's cool. Oh, look at the green ripples. You can see the, what are they? That's a neat little, very, very neat. Is it air glow? Verdant emission produced by photochemistry in Earth's upper atmosphere. That's neat. What do we got? Nothing big in space weather. Nothing too big on terrestrial. It's windy as fuck outside right now, I gotta say. Lots of wind coming in from the west. I think I saw something about a big system moving into California, and yeah, you got all the wet air coming through there. What's our jet stream? Ew. Taking it right off the Pacific, right across the middle of the country with a small, look at that. A little outflow from the Arctic is interesting. And then current radar not available. What? Okay. Ah, there we go. What do we got? It's kind of stagnant, it looks like. A little bit of moisture, Pacific. A little bit over the Four Corners region. Some moving into the middle of the country. Alright, that's that for that. Like I said, kind of short today. Not really feeling it. Tired, bored, irritated. Anyway, bye.